Last night at 2:47 a.m., my 9-year-old daughter Emma bolted upright in bed, screaming, "He's here again! The shadow man is standing right next to my dresser." I rushed into her room and saw nothing, but when I checked our security cameras this morning, they showed absolutely nothing in Emma's room at that exact time. Yet the terror in her eyes was real, and she described details about this shadow man that made my blood run cold. My name is Rachel Davis, and I'm 29 years old. I work as a veterinarian at Desert Springs Animal Hospital here in Phoenix, Arizona, and I've been raising Emma alone for the past 3 years since my divorce. Until 6 months ago, I thought our biggest challenge was adjusting to life without Emma's father, Kevin, who walked out on us when he decided being a husband and father was too much responsibility for his tech consulting career. I thought Emma's occasional nightmares were normal for a child whose father had abandoned her. I thought her fear of the dark was just a phase she'd outgrow. I thought the security cameras I'd installed after our divorce would make us both feel safer in our small house in the Ahwatukee neighborhood. I was wrong about all of it. Emma has been seeing what she calls the shadow man for 6 months now. Not every night, but often enough that I've started sleeping with her bedroom door open and a baby monitor next to my bed. She describes him as a tall, dark figure who stands perfectly still in her room, usually near her dresser or by the window, watching her sleep. "He doesn't move like a regular person, Mommy," Emma explained to me after the third incident. "He's there, and then he's not there, but he never walks away. And when he talks to me, his voice sounds like it's coming from inside the walls." The most disturbing part isn't that Emma thinks she sees someone in her room. It's that she knows things about this figure that she shouldn't know. She says he tells her secrets about our family, about things that happened before she was born, about places we've lived that she's too young to remember. Last week, Emma drew a picture of the shadow man and included details that made me physically sick. She drew him holding what looked like keys, standing next to a car that looked exactly like Kevin's old Honda Civic, the one he drove when we first moved to Phoenix. Emma was only 4 when Kevin traded that car in for his current truck. She shouldn't remember what it looked like, let alone draw it with such accuracy. I've taken Emma to Dr. Sarah Wilson, a child psychiatrist who specializes in childhood trauma and anxiety disorders. After 3 sessions and a complete psychological evaluation, Dr. Wilson found no signs of mental illness, no indicators of abuse, and no evidence that Emma is making up these encounters. Emma is a mentally healthy, intelligent child who genuinely believes she's experiencing these visitations, Dr. Wilson told me after her last session. Her fear is real, her descriptions are consistent, and she shows no signs of the kind of fantasy-reality confusion we typically see in children who create imaginary scenarios. But here's what's driving me to the edge of my sanity. Our security cameras, which cover every angle of Emma's room, show absolutely nothing during these incidents. I've reviewed hours of footage. I've had the system checked by professionals. The cameras are working perfectly, recording continuously, with night vision capability that should capture any movement or presence in Emma's room. Yet Emma continues to wake up screaming about the shadow man who talks to her, who knows things he shouldn't know, and who apparently exists in a way that modern technology can't detect. Either my daughter is experiencing something supernatural, or someone has found a way to terrorize a 9-year-old child while remaining completely invisible to security cameras. And I'm terrified that the truth might be worse than either possibility. 3 years ago, my life looked completely different. Kevin and I had been married for 7 years, living in a larger house in Scottsdale with plans to expand our family and build the kind of stable suburban life that looked perfect from the outside. Kevin worked as a technology consultant for various companies around Phoenix, specializing in security systems and network infrastructure. I was establishing my veterinary practice and dreaming about giving Emma siblings. The divorce wasn't dramatic or violent. It was worse than that. It was Kevin simply deciding one day that he didn't want to be married anymore, that he felt trapped by family responsibilities, and that he needed to find himself without the burden of a wife and child. He moved out with minimal discussion, agreed to pay child support without argument, and seemed relieved to be free of us. Emma, who was 6 at the time, struggled to understand why Daddy suddenly didn't want to live with us anymore. She would ask when he was coming home, why he didn't call as often as he promised, and whether she had done something wrong to make him leave. Kevin's visits became increasingly sporadic, often canceled at the last minute for work commitments or travel. I bought our current house in Ahwatukee because it was in Emma's school district and because I could afford it on my veterinary salary. It's a modest 3-bedroom ranch house with a small backyard where Emma can play with our 2 rescue dogs, Max and Bella. The neighborhood is quiet, family-friendly, and safe, exactly what I thought we needed to start over. Emma adapted to our new life better than I expected. She made friends at school, excelled in 3rd grade, and seemed to be processing the divorce in healthy ways. She talked about missing her daddy, but she also talked about liking our girl time and enjoying having the dog sleep in her bed when she had bad dreams. I installed the security system 6 months after we moved in, not because I felt unsafe, but because Kevin had always handled our home security when we were married, and I wanted to feel confident about protecting Emma on my own. The system was comprehensive: cameras in the living room, kitchen, hallways, and Emma's bedroom, with motion sensors and night vision capabilities. Kevin had visitation rights every other weekend and 1 evening per week, but he rarely exercised them. His visits became even less frequent over the past year, often going months between seeing Emma. When he did visit, he seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly and cutting visits short for work emergencies. Emma stopped asking when Daddy was coming to visit and started talking about Mark, my veterinary assistant, as her favorite grown-up man. Mark had been incredibly kind to both of us, helping with household repairs, attending Emma's school events when Kevin couldn't, and treating Emma like she was his own daughter. Our routine was comfortable and predictable. Emma would come to the clinic with me after school, doing homework in my office while I finished with patients. We'd go home together, make dinner, watch a movie, or read books, and I'd tuck her into bed with stories and songs. She was sleeping peacefully, adjusting well to our life, and showing no signs of anxiety or behavioral problems. The first incident happened on a Tuesday night in March. Emma woke up screaming at 3:15 a.m., claiming a tall man was standing in her room watching her sleep. I checked every corner, looked under the bed, examined the windows, and found nothing. The security cameras showed Emma's room empty except for her. "Maybe it was a bad dream, sweetheart," I told her as I tucked her back into bed. "It wasn't a dream, Mommy. He was really there. He told me he knows where we keep our spare key, and he knows that you cry sometimes when you think I'm asleep." The accuracy of those details made my skin crawl. We did keep a spare key hidden under a fake rock near the back door, and I did sometimes cry quietly in my room at night, thinking Emma couldn't hear me. But those weren't things that would appear in a normal childhood nightmare. The incidents continued sporadically, sometimes weeks apart, sometimes several nights in a row. Emma's descriptions remained consistent: a tall, dark figure who stood perfectly still, watching her, occasionally speaking to her in a voice that seemed to come from the walls rather than from a person. I had the security system checked 3 times. I installed additional motion sensors. I even had our house blessed by a priest from our church, thinking that if this was some kind of supernatural presence, maybe spiritual intervention would help. Nothing changed. Emma continued to see the shadow man, and the cameras continued to show nothing. Dr. Wilson recommended keeping a detailed journal of Emma's experiences, looking for patterns that might explain what was happening. I started recording everything: the dates and times of incidents, Emma's exact descriptions, anything unusual that happened during the day that might trigger nightmares. What I found in that journal terrified me more than any supernatural explanation could have. The pattern that emerged from my journal was worse than random supernatural visits. Emma's encounters with the shadow man weren't arbitrary. They followed a specific schedule that I hadn't noticed until I started documenting everything systematically. The shadow man appeared every 2 to 3 weeks, always on nights when Emma had been particularly happy or excited during the day. After her school play performance, he appeared. After a successful soccer game, he was there. After Mark took us to the zoo, and Emma had the best day she'd had in months, The shadow man visited that very night. But the most disturbing pattern was what the shadow man told Emma. He wasn't just watching her, he was delivering messages that seemed designed to undermine her sense of security and happiness. The shadow man says, "Mommy is going to send me away like Daddy did," Emma told me after one encounter. "He says grown-ups always leave, and I shouldn't get too attached to Mark because he'll leave too. He knows about the time I broke your favorite mug and hid the pieces in my toy box," she said another time. "He says you only pretend not to be mad about things, but you're really angry at me for making Daddy leave." These weren't random childhood fears. They were specific psychological attacks designed to make Emma doubt my love for her and to create anxiety about abandonment. Someone was systematically trying to damage my daughter's mental health, and they were doing it in a way that made it impossible for me to prove. The breakthrough came when Emma drew another picture of the shadow man, but this time she included details that made me physically ill. She drew him holding what looked like a small device, something rectangular that glowed. When I asked her about it, she said, "He always has his little light box. He points it at things in my room, and then the light moves around like he's looking for something." I showed the drawing to my brother Tom, who works as a detective with the Phoenix Police Department. Tom had been supportive but skeptical about Emma's experiences, gently suggesting that childhood imagination and divorce trauma might be creating these nightmares. But when he saw Emma's drawing, his expression changed completely. "Rachel, that looks like a thermal imaging device or some kind of infrared scanner. These aren't the kind of details a 9-year-old would imagine. Where would Emma have seen something like that?" That's when I remembered Kevin's work. As a technology consultant specializing in security systems, Kevin had access to all kinds of surveillance and detection equipment. He'd often brought devices home to test them, including thermal cameras and infrared scanners that could detect heat signatures through walls. "Tom, what if someone is using technology to watch Emma in a way that our regular security cameras can't detect?" "You mean like thermal imaging from outside the house?" "That's possible, but they'd have to be close, and our cameras would show someone approaching the house." But as we talked, a more terrifying possibility emerged. What if someone wasn't watching Emma from outside? What if they were somehow accessing her room in a way that avoided our cameras but allowed them to be physically present? That night I decided to sleep in Emma's room instead of just monitoring from my bedroom. I set up a chair in the corner where I could watch both Emma and the camera's field of view. If the shadow man appeared, I would see exactly what Emma saw, or I'd finally have proof that these were elaborate nightmares. At 2:30 a.m., Emma sat up in bed, eyes wide with terror. "He's here, Mommy. He's standing right behind you." I turned around and saw nothing. The camera showed nothing. But as I stared at the empty space where Emma claimed the shadow man was standing, I noticed something that made my heart race. There was a very faint heat shimmer in the air, like what you see rising from hot pavement in summer. It was barely visible, lasted only a few seconds, and could easily be mistaken for a trick of the light. But Emma was pointing directly at it. "He's moving toward the window now," she whispered. I followed her gaze and saw the faint shimmer move across the room toward the window. As it reached the wall, I heard the softest sound like fabric brushing against the window frame. Someone was in Emma's room. Someone using technology that made them nearly invisible to both human eyes and security cameras. Someone who could enter and exit our house without triggering any of our security systems. "Emma, go to my room right now," I whispered urgently. "Lock the door and call Uncle Tom." As Emma ran from the room, I grabbed a baseball bat from her closet and examined the window. The lock was still secure. The screen was intact, but when I ran my hands along the frame, I found something that shouldn't have been there. A tiny hole had been drilled through the window frame, just large enough for a very small camera lens. The hole was painted over to match the frame, invisible unless you were looking for it specifically. Our house was being surveilled by someone with access to advanced camouflage technology and the technical skills to install covert monitoring equipment. And based on the systematic psychological manipulation of my daughter, I was beginning to suspect exactly who that someone was. Tom arrived within 20 minutes, bringing 2 other detectives and a crime scene technician with specialized equipment for detecting electronic surveillance devices. What they found in Emma's room changed everything. The tiny camera in the window frame was just the beginning. Using thermal and electromagnetic detection equipment, they discovered a network of micro-cameras and listening devices throughout our house. They were hidden in air vents, behind picture frames, inside electrical outlets, and even embedded in the walls themselves. "Rachel, this is professional-grade surveillance equipment," Tom told me as the technician carefully removed devices from Emma's room. "Whoever installed this has extensive technical knowledge and expensive gear. This isn't some random stalker, this is someone with serious resources and expertise." But the most disturbing discovery came when they examined the devices more closely. Each piece of equipment was military or law enforcement grade, the kind of technology that wasn't available to regular consumers. The installation work was precise and sophisticated, requiring intimate knowledge of our house's layout and electrical systems. "These devices have been here for months, maybe longer," the technician reported. "They're powered by your house's electrical system, which means whoever installed them had extended access to your home to do this kind of work." As we inventoried the surveillance network, a terrifying picture emerged. Someone had been watching and listening to our every moment for at least 6 months. They knew our schedules, our routines, our private conversations. They had access to every detail of our daily lives. But the most sophisticated part of the surveillance wasn't the hidden cameras, it was the technology being used to create the shadow man that Emma had been seeing. In the corner of Emma's room, behind her bookshelf, they found a device that Tom's experts identified as an advanced holographic projector combined with thermal camouflage technology. It could create visual distortions that would be nearly invisible to security cameras while projecting threatening figures that would terrify a child. "This is how someone could appear and disappear in Emma's room without showing up on your cameras," the technician explained. "The thermal camouflage makes them nearly invisible to standard security systems, and the holographic projector could create additional visual effects to enhance the psychological impact." The final piece of evidence was a control system hidden in our basement that could remotely operate all the devices in our house. The system included a computer with months of recorded footage from our daily lives, detailed notes about our routines, and most disturbingly, a file labeled custody documentation. Inside that file were hundreds of recordings of Emma's reactions to the Shadow Man incidents, along with detailed psychological profiles and strategies for making Emma appear mentally unstable. Someone had been systematically documenting Emma's terror as evidence that she was having psychological problems that would make me an unfit mother. "Tom, this is a custody manipulation scheme," I said as the pieces finally came together. "Someone is trying to drive Emma crazy and document her breakdown as evidence that I can't take care of her properly. Do you have any idea who would have both the technical skills and the legal motivation to do something this elaborate?" I thought about Kevin's sporadic visits, his technical expertise, his sudden disinterest in seeing Emma regularly, and his recent inquiries about modifying the custody agreement. I thought about his access to military-grade surveillance equipment through his consulting work and his intimate knowledge of our house from when he'd lived there. "I need to call Kevin," I told Tom. "I need to hear his reaction when I tell him what we found." I dialed Kevin's number on speakerphone so Tom could hear the conversation. "Rachel, it's 4 a.m. This better be an emergency. Kevin, we found surveillance equipment hidden throughout our house. Emma's been seeing someone in her room because someone has been using advanced camouflage technology to terrorize her. The police think it's connected to a custody manipulation scheme." There was a pause that lasted too long. That's terrible, Rachel. Do they have any idea who would do something like that?" But I could hear something in his voice that I'd never noticed before, a careful, calculated tone that sounded like someone choosing their words very deliberately. "Kevin, where were you 3 nights ago at 2:30 a.m.? "I was home, asleep." "Why would you ask me that?" "Because that's when Emma saw the Shadow Man last, and the surveillance equipment shows someone was in our house at that exact time." Another pause. "Rachel, You're obviously very upset about this situation. Maybe it would be better if Emma stayed with me for a while until you get this security issue sorted out. I've been concerned about the stress you're under as a single mother, and now with someone stalking your house. The manipulation was so smooth, so perfectly calculated, that it would have been convincing if I hadn't already figured out who was behind everything. Kevin, we're going to find whoever did this. And when we do, they're going to prison for child abuse, stalking, and conspiracy to manipulate custody proceedings. Of course, I hope you catch them. But in the meantime, I really think Emma would be safer staying with me. After I hung up, Tom looked at me with the expression he gets when he's built a solid criminal case. Rachel, I think we need to get a warrant for Kevin's computer and financial records. And I think Emma needs to know that the Shadow Man was never supernatural. It was someone using technology to hurt her. That morning, while the crime scene team finished documenting evidence in our house, I sat down with Emma to explain what we'd discovered. Sweetheart, the Shadow Man wasn't a ghost or a monster. It was a real person using special technology to hide from our cameras while scaring you. And we're going to make sure they never come back. Emma looked at me with relief and anger that was heartbreaking for a 9-year-old. Mommy, I knew he was real. I knew I wasn't making it up. But why would someone want to scare me? Sometimes adults do terrible things for selfish reasons. But the important thing is that you're safe now, and no one is ever going to make you doubt what you saw again. As I held Emma, I realized that Kevin's elaborate scheme had failed in the most important way. Instead of making Emma appear unstable, his psychological torture had revealed his true character and given us everything we needed to protect her from him permanently. The search warrant for Kevin's apartment revealed evidence that shocked even Tom's experienced criminal investigation team. Kevin's home office looked like a command center for psychological warfare, with multiple monitors displaying live feeds from our house, detailed psychological profiles of Emma, and a timeline showing months of careful planning for his custody manipulation scheme. But the most damning evidence was Kevin's own documentation of his activities. He'd kept meticulous records of every Shadow Man incident, complete with Emma's reactions, my responses, and assessments of how effectively each encounter was damaging Emma's mental health and my credibility as a mother. This is the most elaborate child abuse case I've ever investigated. Detective Sarah Lopez told me as they processed Kevin's equipment. He spent over $50,000 on specialized surveillance and camouflage technology, all to terrorize a 9-year-old child into appearing mentally unstable. The technical sophistication of Kevin's scheme was breathtaking and horrifying. He'd used military-grade thermal camouflage suits that made him nearly invisible to standard security cameras. Combined with intimate knowledge of our house's layout and his installed surveillance network, he could enter Emma's room, appear as a threatening shadow figure, deliver psychological manipulation, and disappear without leaving evidence that traditional security systems could detect. Kevin's computer files revealed the calculated cruelty behind every Shadow Man encounter. He'd studied child psychology extensively, researching the most effective ways to create lasting trauma and anxiety in children. His notes included strategies for making Emma doubt reality, creating abandonment fears, and undermining her trust in me. Look at this timeline. Tom showed me a printout from Kevin's computer. He planned each Shadow Man visit to occur after Emma had particularly good days, school performances, soccer victories, and happy times with you and Mark. He systematically attacked every moment of joy in her life. The financial records revealed that Kevin had been preparing this custody manipulation for over a year. He'd purchased the surveillance equipment, rented storage units to test the camouflage technology, and even hired a private investigator to document what he claimed were my failures as a single mother. But Kevin had made one crucial mistake in his planning. He'd assumed that no one would believe a 9-year-old's claims about seeing an invisible man, and he'd counted on my protective instincts to make me seem overprotective or paranoid when I tried to defend Emma. He hadn't anticipated that Emma would be able to provide accurate technical details about his equipment, or that her consistent, detailed descriptions would eventually lead us to discover his surveillance network. The arrest happened at Kevin's office, where he was consulting on a security system installation for another client, a bitter irony that wasn't lost on the detectives. When they confronted him with the evidence from his computer and the surveillance equipment from our house, Kevin initially tried to deny everything. "This is obviously a setup," he told the detectives. "Rachel is clearly unstable, and she's trying to frame me because I've been seeking custody modifications. Emma needs a stable father figure, not a mother who believes in ghost stories." But when they showed him recordings of his own voice delivering psychological threats to Emma through the hidden speaker systems he'd installed, Kevin's defense crumbled. The recorded audio was particularly damning. Kevin's voice, disguised through electronic distortion but still identifiable through voice analysis, could be heard telling Emma that I didn't really love her, that I was going to abandon her like her father had, and that she was a burden that made everyone unhappy. "Kevin Johnson, you're under arrest for child abuse, stalking, breaking and entering, illegal surveillance, and conspiracy to manipulate custody proceedings," Detective Lopez announced as they handcuffed him in his office parking lot. The legal proceedings moved quickly. Kevin's own documentation provided prosecutors with overwhelming evidence of premeditated child abuse. His computer files, the sophisticated surveillance equipment, and the audio recordings of his psychological manipulation created an ironclad case that his defense attorney advised him not to contest. During the sentencing hearing, the judge's words were particularly harsh. "Mr. Johnson, you used your technical expertise and intimate knowledge of your daughter's psychology to systematically torture a child. You turned your own daughter's bedroom into a laboratory for psychological abuse, all for the purpose of manipulating custody arrangements. This represents a level of calculated cruelty toward a child that demands the maximum sentence available under the law." Kevin received 8 years in prison for child abuse and stalking, with an additional 5 years of supervised probation that prohibited any contact with Emma or me. The judge also ordered him to pay for Emma's therapy and counseling for as long as she needed it. But the most important moment of vindication came when Dr. Wilson met with Emma after Kevin's arrest. "Emma, I want you to know that everything you told me about the Shadow Man was true. You were never imagining things, you were never making up stories, and you were never confused about what was happening to you. A bad person was using technology to scare you, but you were brave enough to tell the truth even when it was hard for adults to understand." Emma's response was simple but profound. "I knew he was real, Dr. Wilson, and I knew my mommy would believe me and keep me safe, even when the cameras couldn't see him." For the first time in months, Emma smiled without looking over her shoulder first. 1 year after Kevin's arrest, Emma and I had rebuilt our lives in ways that felt stronger and more authentic than anything we'd experienced before. The trauma of Kevin's psychological manipulation had been severe, but Emma's recovery was remarkable, aided by excellent therapy and the knowledge that her experiences had been real and that the adults in her life had ultimately believed and protected her. We moved to a new house in Tempe, closer to my veterinary practice and Emma's new school. This house had no history with Kevin, no hidden surveillance equipment, and most importantly, it was a space where Emma could feel genuinely safe. She chose her own room, painted it her favorite shade of purple, and filled it with books, art supplies, and the 2 rescue dogs who had become her constant companions. Emma's relationship with Mark deepened into something beautiful and healing. He never tried to replace Kevin as her father, but instead became a trusted adult who showed her what healthy, respectful relationships looked like. When Mark proposed to me 8 months after Kevin's arrest, Emma was more excited than I was. "Mark makes you smile the way you used to smile before Daddy became mean," she told me when I asked how she felt about the engagement. "And he never lies or tries to trick people. He just loves us for real." The therapy sessions with Dr. Wilson helped Emma process not just the trauma of the Shadow Man incidents, but the deeper betrayal of realizing that her father had deliberately chosen to hurt her. The breakthrough came when Emma was able to articulate that Kevin's actions weren't a reflection of her worth, but of his own brokenness. Dr. Wilson says that when grown-ups hurt children, it's never the child's fault, Emma explained to me after one session. She says that what my biological father did to me was about his own problems, not about me being bad or unlovable. Emma's resilience amazed everyone involved in her recovery. She returned to school with confidence, made new friends easily, and showed no signs of the anxiety or trust issues that often follow psychological abuse. Her teacher reported that Emma had become a particularly empathetic classmate, often helping other children who seemed scared or upset. It's like Emma has developed a special ability to recognize when someone needs support, her teacher told me during a parent conference. She seems to understand that sometimes people are scared for reasons that aren't obvious, and she's wonderful at making others feel safe and believed. The legal aftermath of Kevin's case extended beyond our family. The sophisticated nature of his surveillance and psychological manipulation scheme led to new legislation in Arizona regarding the use of technology in domestic abuse cases. The Kevin Johnson case became a reference point for law enforcement training on how abusers could use advanced technology to terrorize victims while avoiding detection. Detective Lopez stayed in touch with us throughout Kevin's trial and beyond. She told me that our case had changed how her department investigated claims of stalking or harassment, particularly when children were involved. Emma taught us to take children's reports seriously, even when physical evidence isn't immediately apparent, she said. Her detailed descriptions and consistent accounts were crucial evidence, but more importantly, her courage in continuing to tell the truth, despite being gaslit by her own father, probably saved other children from similar abuse. 6 months after moving to our new house, Emma asked if she could redecorate her bathroom. When I asked what changes she wanted to make, her answer was both heartbreaking and hopeful. I want to put up pictures of our family, you, me, Mark, Max, and Bella. And I want a really pretty mirror, one that shows good things instead of scary things. As we installed a new mirror surrounded by photos of happy memories, Emma made an observation that showed how much she'd healed. "Mommy, mirrors used to be scary because I thought they might show the shadow man, but now I know that mirrors only show what's really there. And what's really here is our family, and love, and safety." The final closure came when Kevin's parental rights were permanently terminated. Emma would never be legally required to see him again, and she would never have to worry about court-ordered visitation with someone who had systematically abused her. On the day the court finalized the termination, Emma and I went out for ice cream to celebrate. As we sat in the sunshine outside, our favorite ice cream shop, Emma made a statement that perfectly captured the growth and wisdom she'd gained from surviving Kevin's psychological warfare. "Mommy, I'm glad I was brave enough to keep telling people about the shadow man, even when no one could see him. Because sometimes the scariest things are the ones that hide from grown-ups, but kids can still tell when something is wrong. You were incredibly brave, sweetheart. You never gave up telling the truth, even when it was hard. I think that's what kept us safe. When bad things happen, you have to keep talking about them until someone believes you and helps you fix them." Today, Emma is 11 years old, thriving in 6th grade, and planning to be either a veterinarian like me or a detective like Uncle Tom, so she can help other kids who are scared and need adults to believe them. She sleeps peacefully in her purple room, surrounded by photos of people who love her authentically, protected by security systems that exist to keep her safe rather than to spy on her. The shadow man is gone forever, but the strength Emma found in surviving his psychological attacks remains. She learned that her voice matters, that telling the truth is always the right choice, and that real love never requires fear or confusion. And maybe most importantly, she learned that even when scary things seem impossible to prove, persistent courage and trusted adults can make miracles happen. Sometimes the best way to defeat invisible monsters is to keep talking about them until someone believes you enough to help you turn on the lights. Mark officially adopted Emma last month, and she now signs her school papers as Emma Davis Wilson. But when I asked her what name made her feel most proud, she said, "I like being Emma the Brave. That's who I really am." I couldn't agree more.